Okay, to recap from my previous video titled Gold Rigging and Bent Judges, a New York lawsuit sat by Judge Valerie E. Caproni against Deutsche Bank, UBS, HSBC and Scotiabank that accused them all of suppressing prices of precious metals for the past 17 years, an extremely serious fraud with liabilities into the hundreds of trillions of US dollars. Deutsche Bank has confessed, disclosing materials that incriminated other co-defendants. In this video, I shall be discussing UBS's role. Now, Deutsche Bank settled the allegations. They provide these materials, these chat logs that have incriminated UBS and HSBC, and the claimants team in this New York lawsuit in a few months identified that UBS and HSBC, their traders were colluding together to suppress prices and trigger stop-loss events amongst their own clients. So their own clients, when they see the dip, are forced to sell, which the cartel then buys up. We are to believe that BaFin, the German regulator who spent over a year auditing Deutsche Bank, didn't know that this was going on, didn't spot this in the records, didn't see the signs. Well, that's bloody ridiculous, because any layman in the precious metals industry knows that the allegations going around are that the banks collude together to force prices to dip so that their own clients lose everything. So the allegations that were made exactly match what was detected in these chat logs, and we are to believe that the regulators were too ignorant and too deluded not to have checked for this kind of collusion. It is just unbelievable. Now, Deutsche Bank claimed that they were auditing themselves in Reuters on the 19th of June 2014, and it's unbelievable that you could have a substantial audit that would challenge these allegations. And again, that Deutsche Bank's own auditors didn't detect that fraud. It's just unbelievable. So Deutsche Bank's correspondence to me that said that they'd investigated themselves and found nothing, while they were telling the world that they were investigating and the investigation was ongoing. Clearly the audit was totally facetious. It was a fraud to hide another fraud, a set of frauds. Now, in 2016, I sent a letter to the UK Treasury Select Committee, and I got confirmation back from the Select Committee. And in that letter that you can read on my website, you can see I emailed BaFin back in 2014 and accused Deutsche Bank of faking its audits. I gave them the correspondence. BaFin stonewalled me. The UK Treasury Select Committee didn't care a damn that Deutsche Bank have confessed to the allegations in New York, while BaFin apparently finds them innocent in 2015. And the UK Treasury Select Committee doesn't give a damn that the FCA and the SFO all knew about my letters to and from Deutsche Bank. So every regulator knew that Deutsche Bank's audits were fake, just as every regulator with any intelligence knew that BaFin's audits were fake. BaFin, in other words, is in on the gold manipulation fraud against the better interests of Deutsche Bank's own clients. So they're robbing the poor to feed the ultra-rich. That can only really happen if BaFin is told to rig the system from Merkel, from the other ECB bureaucrats. So this is a crime of the elite, no doubt. Now, in 2015, UBS won immunity from the US Department of Justice for blowing the whistle on the other cartel members. Well, you don't get immunity unless two things are true. First, you've got to be guilty of the crime, otherwise what's the point in getting immunity? And second, you've got to incriminate someone who's more guilty than you are. Now, according to Reuters and Bloomberg, there were 10 banks involved with UBS's whistleblowing. That included Barclays, which was the defendant in my lawsuit, along with JP Morgan, and also Deutsche Bank. So you can probably figure they're all guilty. You can't suppress prices without the dominant market players agreeing not to buy on the dip. Because if they buy on the dip, then the people selling low lose everything. So every major market participant has to be guilty. So anyway, back to UBS. They've made this confession. And I took this confession to the UK Birmingham Mercantile Court. As I said in my previous video, that court struck out my lawsuit against the banks for gold and silver rigging completely corruptly. And then UBS released this confession. So I applied to have the strikeout struck out, a strikeout of the strikeout, on the basis that defendants had lied to the High Court, had accused UBS of perjuring itself. It had approved Deutsche Bank's bare denial of its audit rigging and its market rigging, and at the same time as it's issuing that bare denial, they were telling the Department of Justice they were as guilty as hell. So I applied for disclosure of that confession for use in the Court of Appeal. I asked UBS to disclose that. Now, when I turned up for court, I knew that no defendant had supplied a witness statement to deny perjury, which means that UBS's counsel didn't know whether UBS had pleaded guilty or not guilty to this allegation of perjury. UBS's counsel didn't even know whether her own client had confessed or not to the Department of Justice. So there's no way counsel could have produced any kind of legitimate defence. As soon as Charles Haddon Cave, the judge in the hearing, understood that no defendants had turned up for court with a witness statement, he immediately interrupted me and denied the jurisdiction of the court. Well, I'd applied in writing for the hearing, and if I didn't have the jurisdiction, then the application should have been refused in writing. He shouldn't have been made to turn up for court so he can turn around and say this court is not valid. So clearly he was only interrupting me when he knew that I knew the defence was not admissible. And it wasn't the defendants who came up with this defence, but the judge. So the judge supplies the defence on behalf of the defendants. Judges aren't meant to take sides with the defendants even before the defendants have spoken. So I demanded his recusal. He refused, stonewalled, didn't explain himself, and at the end of the hearing, you can guess, he said, "Oh, this application is totally without merit." Oh, really? He wouldn't even force UBS to disclose its confession to the Court of Appeal. They didn't even have to admit or deny confessing. It's that absurd. So yet another bent judge stonewalls the evidence and obstructs justice. Now, in this New York lawsuit, UBS seem to be stonewalling. Deutsche Bank have confessed and they haven't. So where is the US Department of Justice? I mean, they know that this lawsuit is underway. They know that UBS is a defendant, and they awarded UBS immunity on the grounds that UBS had cooperated with law enforcement. So obviously the US Department of Justice is not doing its bloody job again. Why is UBS allowed to get away with stonewalling? No normal defendant gets away with that kind of behaviour. So now we come to the title of the video. UBS confessed to gold rigging in New York. If you haven't guessed already, it's a statement of what they should do, rather than a statement of what they've done. And if that seems like a perverse title for this video, well, that's how the mainstream fake news treat Donald Trump. They sell you one thing in the title of the news story, and the body is completely different. So I make no apologies there. I will say again, UBS confessed to gold rigging in New York because you're bent bastards and you need to go to jail. This particularly rapid and intelligible